I want to welcome you guys here, and I want to thank Dr. Brown for making all this possible. And I want to thank Joyce Rush, without which this could not happen. This is Joyce right there. This is the main force behind this whole show. And I want to thank, well, let's put it this way, 90% of the research involved in that glossary, which is over 1,200 hours worth of research, came out of Ashgabat in Turkmenistan. And Joyce is the mainstay of that research. When I told her I couldn't return the words to the original Turkic language, in this case Turkmen language, I said, I've got to have a Turkmen dictionary. And the next day she came over and printed out a Turkmen dictionary, one of 3 in the world, over the internet, and brought me the whole copy of the Turkmen dictionary. There's only 3 Turkmen dictionaries. I was only able to get 2. And the 3rd one I'm still trying to get, and I'm chasing the professor who wrote it, who's now somewhere in Cyprus. And anyway, the whole idea is that all the Turkmen terms were anglicized. And that means they were incorrectly spelled, incorrectly pronounced. And I thought it was an insult to the Turkmen people that this was the case. I always found it offensive. And so I decided to take the last 8 months or so and write a glossary that would return the Turkmen words to the rugs. And those are the words that belong with the rugs. I also want to thank Donna Indris from Austin, Texas. This is Donna right here at the copy. She is the other half of the research branch. And she's an authority and specialist in antique ornamental rugs and has a major gallery in Austin, Texas. And I want to say hello to all y'all, including Ann and Linda, and my dad and his wife from Texas. We have people from all over in this little room right here. And who else? I guess that's it. Anyway, oh, Danny Adami from San Antonio. At any rate, what we kind of did here is we tried to recreate the inside of a Turkmen chief's tent. And basically, you have to imagine the most remote place on the planet, devastating environment to live in, and yet they can create these things. They had no written language. They lived there for thousands of years. And it's hard to imagine the life that they led. Probably the finest mounted fighting cavalry that ever lived on the planet. And these guys were the best killers, the best horse traders, the best horsemen. They were almost animal-like in their life. In other words, they lived their whole life as a totem for animals. So they were herdsmen, they were cattlemen, they were thieves, brigands, robbers, stealers of wives, you name it. And the defensive backup army for almost every Shah, almost every Khan in the Khanate Bukhara or in the Khiva Khanate or the Bukhara Khanate, these guys fought the wars for the Uzbeks and the Mongols. They basically were the finest fighting force on horseback that ever lived on the planet. And yet, at the same time, they could weave these rugs, which I never could understand. I bought my first heke when I was 18, and I bought it because I was knocked out by it. I couldn't believe anything was so incredible. And this is 40 years later that I'm still being knocked out by these things on an almost never-ending basis. I only wish I had more. Basically, each one of these things is in a world of itself. In here represented 5 of the major Turkmen tribes. The tribes are the Ersari, the Teke, the Yomud, the Chowdor, and the what, Joyce? Sadiq. The Sadiq and Slor. Actually, 6 tribes. And I have pieces here from each tribe. Let me try to explain that the history of these tribes quickly as the Russians moved into the area in the early 1700s. Catherine the Great had a fantasy of returning the great Byzantine Empire to Central Asia that used to be in Constantinople. And so she figured if she conquered these tribes, she'd be able to pull this off. She was heavily defeated on several occasions for 100 years by the Turkmen armies. It was really, she started in 1720. It was really only in about 1880 that the Russian army finally succeeded. And when the Russian army succeeded, that was it. There was no more weaving. And in my opinion, this is the finest weaving in the world. Finer than any Persian weaving, finer than any Turkish or Anatolian weaving. It is hard to imagine how these people could take wool off of a goat that they raised in such a way to produce the wool that they needed for the rug and make things of this kind of beauty. The hard part, even harder to understand, is that these rugs are codexes of their history. They had no written language. So everything that was infused into their consciousness for 2,000–3,000 years is in these rugs, and it's driven in these symbols. The symbols are the most incredible thing of all, because the symbols represent their philosophies. And encoded in the symbols are all of the 7 world's major religions, including Christianity. Half the symbols that you're looking at here in these rugs are hidden Christian symbols. There's Islamic symbols, there's Arabic symbols, there's Persian symbols, there are Kurdish symbols, there's sun-worshipping symbols, there are Chinese symbols, all infused into one symbol. And this is how it works. A lot of these people are driven by Sufis, and Sufis came into the region in the 13th, 14th century and started setting up a lot of this process. What Sufis do is they pick and choose what they like from each religion. What the Turkmen do is they come along after all that's done and they totem the ornaments. So what I mean by this is they give them animal names. So they Christian cross and give it an animal name. They can take a Chinese yin-yang symbol, which is what this is, and give it an animal name. So in this particular case, this is a gush gul. Gul means lake. And this really isn't a lake. What it really is a Chinese yin-yang symbol. And it represents the great Chinese circle of life. Each of these sides of this octagon represents one of the trigrams in the Chinese Book of Changes. And that means that they represent earth, air, fire, and water, then wind, mountain, cloud, and rain. The final 2 are light and dark, which is male, female, which is yin-yang. When you spin them, it represents all the combinations of these things that can take place in the world. These are all great Chinese symbols of the earth, but the Turkmen call them lakes or guls. They're not guls, they're not really yin-yang symbols, but in a way, they are a fusion of all of those. So inside these we have birds, where the gush comes from. Gush is Turkmen for bird. We have this incredible connection. These people, thousands of years ago, crossed with the Chinese so often. As a matter of fact, they came from China, I guess the Altaic region. Before they hit the Altaic region, they really moved over from China. And what they did, they crossed paths with the Chinese, the Mongols. Everybody crossed paths in these ancient tribal meeting grounds. And these designs came of it. Now, you can tell me how that happened. I can't figure it out myself. But essentially, what this is it's a very balanced symmetry in one of the roughest groups of people on the planet. And they needed this kind of balance. So in their rugs, they have this sophisticated balance that's beyond belief. And yet these people are out, you know, fighting wars, killing people, robbing each other, all this kind of stuff. And yet they come home and they make these incredible things. It's just beyond belief. Anyway, my feeling is, and I've had this for around 30 years, is each one of these represents a male-female unit in the tribe. And what this codex says to these people is, in order to get along, you have to be in balance. The females have to be in balance with the males, and each one makes up a certain unit. Then those units are all connected with this grid line. The odd thing about the grid line is that blue is the color reserved for the devil. So there's another kind of balance taking place on top of that balance. You have to have it. It has to be part of it. These minor guls are really Greek Orthodox crosses. And tops of them is the Gochanic motif, which they call the Gochak motif, is a ram's horn. It's not a ram's horn. But if they got caught with a Christian symbol in their rugs, their cousins would say, well, sorry, you've got to go. And so they hid them in them, and they called them another name. What this ram's horn is, or the Gochak medallion is it's a Hindu birth symbol that goes back 4,000 years. And yet it's sitting here on top of a classic Greek cruciform cross. But this cross, without the octagons on the outside, is the center of the gula. So you have a kind of a major, minor, or male-female unit taking place, which throughout this whole thing, if you see these little bands here, they're light, dark, light, dark, light, dark. Those are called life-death bands, akala jah stripes are what they're called. Here's a little Gochak here, going dark light, dark light, dark light, sun, no sun, day, night, day, night, day, night. This would be the sun. Each one of these people this is a Diriad unit of two people, all connected, all in balance, with the male force being the light, the female force being the absence of the male force. Structurally, a reverse of this all starts becoming a life model of the universe. You could really, is the tribe itself, and this is it's a model or a diorama of the tribe as it moves around its migrations. This here would be the sun as it goes around the tribe. When it's light, dark, the sun is moving on the annual orbit or migration around the tribe. So these pieces here, these half gules, this is really a window, and you're looking through the window, and you see an infinitely repeating pattern. In other words, if this border wasn't here, this would go on forever. So they condense it and stop it here, and they make a kind of a diorama or a model of their existence. So what we're combining here is ancient Hindu symbols, Christian symbols, Chinese symbols, Mongolian symbols, and then it goes on, there's Armenian symbols. These little four legs under the ram's horns here aren't really camel legs. That's the Armenian letter E. And the Armenian letter E stands for He, H-E, and He means the Almighty. It's God. So we have more hidden Christian symbols throughout this whole thing. What you have to realize, it is one of the most remote places that ever was on the planet. And yet, they had this way of taking all the symbols and making them their own. And so this here would be the field in front of the tribe. Let's look at one of these tent bags. This would be the gardens and the fields, and the gardens and the fields in front of the tribe. So again, you consider this the tribe. Each one of these is the yin-yang symbol with the major and the minor versions, the aggressive and recessive versions, the version over here and the version back here without the version over here. It's kind of like the absence of light is darkness. So inside the chief's tent at night, when he has this little light flickering, all he sees are the light parts. The rest of it goes away, which is the role of the female in the universe. Females really have more energy. It's just that it's gone. It's displaced. It doesn't really take place until the sunlight hits it, and then all of a sudden you have the two together. So the other part, the major part of these designs, is the female goddess. The birth cult, the fertility cult. All I said before, these ram's horn is really the female goddess. It's called Ella Beliende, and basically it's a birthing position. It's called women with hands on hips. So the arms are like this, and it's really a birthing position. So they worship death, they worship birth, they worship marriage. That's all they care about in the whole world. So this little pyramided thing here is called the Gilim Barmak symbol. Gilim Barmak means bride's fingers. So what these all are, these pieces here and here and here, they're all once more condensations, all these different philosophies have been going on for thousands of years in the region. And these are coded simplifications of all of these put into one little rug like this. And these rugs often went on the bridal caravan on the lead camel, which had the bride in her litter. And a lot of these are apotropaic, designed to ward off evil. And basically, they protect the bride so that nothing can happen to her. Another thing they worship is color coding, also involved, where they worship white. White goes into the sun-worshipping Zoroastrian or even pre-Zoroastrian philosophies. There's a piece over there on the lower left that's it's called the Akshik Torba. And the Akshik supposedly refers to a grapevine. So those are grape clusters. The Akshik Torba is another apotropaic piece on the bridal litter, protecting the bride. As a matter of fact, most of these small pieces are all back faces. Back faces are either torbas, true wall like this. These had backings on them. All the backings have been removed. What happened was there was a big problem when they tried to bring these rugs to the United States in 1910, 1920 in New York. Americans wouldn't buy them because they were afraid they would stink when the weather changed. So the Armenians started cutting the backs off and selling them for rugs. 1920, if you bought a Hariz, 9x12 Hariz in New York, they gave you one of these with the back cut off. That's how they insinuated them into the American markets. So really, none of these had the backings on them. So in order to get the pieces into the United States, they had to remove the backings. And that's why they're gone. These originally are all bags. These true walls are larger. The torbas are smaller, more personal. That torba up on the left-hand corner right there has what's called the kajebe pattern. It's a model of the bridal litter on top of the camel. All of these pieces were used to protect the bride on the bridal camel as she rode to her new in-laws' tent to meet him. In the case of this piece over here, it was woven by a bride to sit on as a dowry piece while she was waiting to meet her well-wishers, her girlfriends, and so forth. So this is a dowry piece, again woven by the bride to sit on as her own personal little sitting piece. Again, the same images over there. The images are the same. They float through every piece, which makes me believe that the big problem nowadays is everyone's trying to explain which tribe wove which piece. I think the confusing part is that all the images have been reused over and over again for thousands of years. And that means that there really is no connection between which tribe wove and which tribe uses the image. There's only a connection in the fact that you have to kind of get away from that and realize that all these tools belong to a large design pool that they all use. And they were recurrent and they reappeared throughout the tribes, throughout the centuries. Not only that, but the same exact designs are in every Oriental rug, whether Caucasian, Anatolian, Turkish. All the groups basically had the same designs. The difference is these are the only ones that are dark. These are the only ones that are like they are. There's no other rugs woven in the world that are like these worlds. They're unique. And they are still unique today. There's every reason to think that Alexander the Great held exactly the same rug in his hands when he looked at these when he was there. There's no reason to think that this didn't go back for 5,000 years. There's no reason to think that this didn't go back for 50,000 years. One of the fascinating things I learned in my research was that the same language that these people spoke is almost scary, identical to the same language the Cherokee Indians spoke. It is identical to the same language the Maya Indians spoke. There are 80 known exact loan words in the Maya language that are identical to the language the Turkmen speak. If you take a Cherokee Indian to Ashgabat, a Turkmen will come up and call him cousin. If you try to tell that Turkmen that's not your cousin, he'll get in a fight with you over it. And there's a lot of reason to believe that they really are cousins. What I'm trying to say is that what you're seeing right now, by a quirk in history, If Catherine the Great's armies had have gotten through, these wouldn't be here. So it's just a quirk of history that we're living in this same time period, that these rugs are here. Because really, we don't have anything to do with this. It's the rugs that just happen to be here. And we happen to live close enough to the end of this world's most incredible weaving dynasties or epochs, whatever you want to call it. We just happen to be living close to the end of it. So we just happen to be seeing these rugs. And they'll be gone. They're already gone. They were gone in 1930. So there's no more. That's it. All done. And I think for my money, I can remember as a kid watching movies when they'd open up treasure chests. And they'd pull out gold, diamonds, stones, rubies, all that. That really didn't do much for me. But when they pulled out a teke, which sometimes happened, my jaw fell on the floor. How could anything be like a stone compared to one of these? And so it's something inside my mind. I just equate these with almost unearthly value and beauty and power. I think I'm going to stop here because there's a lot more I could say, but I'd rather hear what you have to say if you have any questions or anything like that. Sure. No, only women. The tribes that wove these rugs were wiped out by the Russian armies in the late 1800s. And I mean, they were ordered to decimate them. And they did. So a weaving tradition, and for God only knows how long, at least 3,000 years, ended immediately. Another interesting part, which I should bring up, is that Turkmen are Aryans. They're not Mongols. They're Aryans. They came from the first white people coming out of the Altaic region, using the Altaic language. They were herdsmen, cattlemen, and later semi-agrarian. And essentially, for instance, the Sari, Air, A-R, the second one is Sari, S-A-R-Y. Sari means yellow, Air means man. So it's blonde man, or Aryan man. So the most fascinating thing to me is we have this image of these people being something totally different than what they really are. And as Turkmen, we assume that they're not Aryan, when in fact they are. It's the most amazing thing in the world to me when I think about that, because I spent my whole life collecting, and I didn't really find out they were Aryan until about 6 months ago. And the trouble is, the Russians put an iron curtain over this area when they took it over, and they wouldn't let anyone in. They depersonalized the culture. The collectivization in Stalin's situation, they killed millions of them. Forced the rest in Afghanistan and Persia. So it was basically a designed genocide that took place with these tribes. So what you're looking at is the last of one of the greatest weaving groups that ever lived on the planet that just happens to be sitting in this room right now, which is, to me, is incalculable, is beyond belief. I'll give you another interesting little fact that Nicholas, the Tsar, sent a General Bogly Bubov into the region to become a military vice governor of the Transcaspia. And he just about killed every Turkmen he could get his hands on. He collected Turkmen rugs after he subjugated the tribes, and after his 8-year assignment, presented 144 of these to Nicholas when he returned to Russia. Those rugs comprise the Russian collections now. Those are the base of the Russian museums right now. So when you really think about it, this is an Akal Teke before the Russians. After the Russians, influence started appearing, say in the 1880, these people were weaving somewhere around 50 rugs a year. So they are extremely rare. Yes, sir.
Was this something that most women tried working in, or were they just sort of master craftswomen?
I think that you have to realize that they've been doing it since the dawn of time, They didn't sit around and think about it. It was like a spider weaves a web. They didn't sit back and go, should I weave this, should I not? Or is this pretty, or do you like this design? They just wove. They copied and wove. What they saw, they wove. And it was something that they just did. It was part of their identity. These are really exostructures from their psyche. They really do not think about it in the way we think about it. And you've got to understand that. These pieces are the structure of these pieces is from another world. And yet you can look at them, they're incredible. So you think, you know, it's got to be a linear process involved. It really isn't. Each one of these knots is different. Every knot is treated by itself, independently of every other knot. But they all look perfect, and yet it's a symphony of imperfections that creates their psyche, basically. The essence of their being are these rugs. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the finest camping gear I've ever seen in my life. A lot better than Abercrombie and Fitch. And
he has a question.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I mean, what do you think? You said around the 1930s is when it started to really disappear.
Actually, it disappeared for good in the 1930s. It started in the 1880s.
The Soviets somehow were actually very powerful then and having more of an agenda to control people.
Yeah, these
maybe it was that final nail in the coffin.
Totally.
And do you think that there might be, people tend to, after a period of time, and they have dealt with reality for long enough, they embrace their cultural traditions and return to them? Do you think that it's possible that people might, there's not going to be a resurgence, but there will be enough people to keep it alive?
No, it's finished forever.
The collection's going back.
It's finished forever, and of course supply and demand controls the price of collections. Rarity drives the price. If there's only one left, then the price is infinitely high. The dyes on these pieces are all vegetable or natural. By natural, I mean undyed wool. There's basically madder and indigo are the primary dye components, and there's yellow. Generally speaking, the more presence of yellow, the older the Turkmen rugs, because the rugs were closer to the Caucasus and moving up into the Balkans. And I don't know if you know anything about Caucasian rugs, but they're very bright. There's a tremendous correlation between movement and Turkmen weaving. When a Turkmen group moved, their weaving reflected what happened to them. My old Armenian master, I used to bring books into the little shop, and he'd get very upset. He'd yell at me, "You want to learn rugs or you want to learn books?" And he would take the book and throw it down on the ground, then he'd point to the rug and go, "This is the book. This is the book." And it took me a long time to realize that these really are their books. These encode their entire tribal experience. So if they moved into Lebanon, if they took over another tribe, if they moved close to the Caucasus, if they moved down south to where the mitigating influence of the fundamentalist Sunnis would get a hold of them and drive down the color ratios, and you get darker, more somber rugs. Everything that ever happened to them is read through these books. These are the reports of what happened to them. And they're their language. And the nonverbal language in these rugs is extremely powerful. It's once you understand what these rugs really are, they become like codexes for this group of people. It starts becoming unbelievable. Actually, it gets a little scary. It's just beyond belief. This is their language. These are their books. You know, what next? They're going to fly? They do. It's very simple to point out how. If you take one of these rugs and take it from 2 dimensions and make it into 3 dimensions, you'll see what I mean. For instance, that rug straight in the back, it's got a window around it. But if you see that as a window, and then you look through the window, you start seeing things behind things behind things. So it's almost like a portal or a gateway. And once the rug becomes three-dimensional, I'll take it a step further. Each one of those little ghouls is a tent in the tribe. And if those little octagon ghouls become three-dimensional, then you have their tent. It's an octagon with a dome, a circular wall around it with an opening inside the top. The opening is called a tuinuk. The tuinuk is where they see the stars, and they work with the stars using ritual. The method of ritual, one of them that they use, is they use a wind rope. They tie it through this so-called Wheel of Fortune with a crossbar, the sun in the center. These are representational. They tie this wind rope there, and they manipulate the wind rope and sort of drive themselves through the universe using the wind rope. This is a wind rope, this small band going around the bottom here. That's called a tuinuk yup. The top band is a tent band called a yolim. That goes around the tent. Now remember, this is the tent, and instead of being flat, now we're bringing it out, making a diorama. You have a village here instead of a rug. This really is a dioramic model of their whole being, their whole tribe and everything. This really is the sun going around the tribe during the annual, I guess it would be the journey of the sun. This is the same thing. This really is the field in front of the tribe. If you take these and flip them and make them three-dimensional, they are actual models of the tribe. And they've been this way for how long? 5,000 years? 50,000 years? It's hard to say. But when you think about it, these tents are really devices by which they engage their environment. They use rituals to bring physical things, good crops, healthy babies. If someone's sick, they use the wind rope to manipulate, to bring out the jinni or the blue wolf spirit, to take the disease out of the person. It gets so complex. And yet, once you read the rugs, it just starts making sense. It starts getting incredible at certain points. But it's complicated. So you have to go slow, and you have to understand the meanings of the symbols. But once you start seeing the interrelationships and interdependencies, you start realizing these are not rugs. They're devices. They are actually mechanical devices designed to get that tribe alive down the road to its next pasture ground, wherever it's going. They're what I call meta-programming devices. They absorb into the psyche of the person looking at them, and they start meta-programming that person. This involves a level of intelligence, as I said, it goes back to these Sufi masters. But it probably goes back, that level of knowledge goes back for millennia or eons. God only knows how long. No one's ever really understood these rugs. It's only going to happen, I would say, in the next 10 years that people are going to really understand these rugs. Any more questions?
At the engagement in marriage, when we're traveling, how many rugs does she take with her to her husband's family's tent?
The dowry that she would weave would usually be 6 to 8 pieces, roughly, generally speaking.
Yes, that dowry.
Generally speaking, there were certain bags of this size, certain bags of that size, certain things. They were all functional. A lot of them were geared towards the woman herself. This little piece over here, this is called the Aina Gul Torba. Aina means mirror. So each one of these little squares represents a mirror. Now, one of the things, this went on the bridal camel, and mirrors are designed to reflect. In this case, it would be reflecting evil away from the bride. This is all about protecting the tent, the people, the bride. So, this Aina Gul Torba, which means bag, is designed for her possessions. either mirrors or any other excessive possessions that she has. These little things here are the Gilam Barmak. These little turrets right here, that means bridal fingers. So you have mirrors, you have bridal fingers, you have the Gochanik stripes here that are birth blessings, fertility blessings. Make sure that the marriage is consummated, the baby's healthy. So all of these things are apotropaic, warding off evil, guaranteeing blessings. Once she got to the new tent, these torbas, they had to put 7 around the inside of the flue. And they divided things into 7 layers. For instance, the 7 stars in Ursa Major are the 7 days of the week, which represents the 7 Turkmen saints. Each had a human face. Each is worshipped separately to give them certain things. Good crops, healthy children, that kind of thing. So they had 7 of these. When these were on the bridal camel, they're called kejebes. In Turkmen, lik means a thing for. Kejebe is the bridal litter. So this is a kejebe lik in Turkmen. Kejebe lik means a thing for the bridal litter. But one of the hard things about getting to know these things is once it goes in the tent, once they get to the tent, then it goes around the door or it goes around the dome. At that point, it's no longer a kejebe lik, it's a gape lik. Gape means door and lik means thing for, so it's gape lik. So these things have different names as opposed to in connection with their use. Each time they change the use, they change the name. So this is not reflected anywhere in any Anglican literature in the world on rugs right now. The problem is I have a library with 750 books on antique Oriental rugs. Every term in most of them is incorrect, or at least a majority of the terms. That's because the Russians shut it down and people weren't allowed to go in. So people just use their own terms. In the next 10 years, that's all going to change. All the terms are going to be set straight, mostly because of the internet. It's going to make that possible. In my library of 750 books, I've got only 42 books on Turkmen rugs. There's only 60 or so on the planet. The problem is the 300 articles that I need the most are in Russian. The other 150 that I need the most are in German. So every week for the last 6 to 8 months, I've been getting new updated Russian translations, which means every week my position changes, which, you know, at some point you got to stop. It's an illusion to think that it's going to stop, but at some point you say, well, I've got to stop, but you really can't stop because the process goes forward. But it reminds me of a story once. John Kenneth Galbraith was being accosted by a woman because he was always changing his position. And he looked at her and said, Madam, whenever I get new information, I change my position. What do you do, madam, when you get new information? And that's basically what's happening here. The glossary that I have outside is 1,000, 1,200 hours of research in the last 6 to 8 months. So it's current. It is the most current research in Turkmen rugs in the world. It's all coming from Russia.
Well, Clay, are you saying they're correct? They're working to correct the crime they did themselves to get back to what it's supposed to be?
No, not at all. Not even close. Most of the science is being driven by people who care about Turkmen rugs. For instance, Yeni Safa in the Academy of Sciences in Ashgabat is the historical carpet researcher, and she's come out in the last couple of years with the only true description of the metaphysical implications of the wedding tent. And, another guy named Dr. Peter Andrews in the last 10 years or so has come up with another series of incredible articles describing the tent. All of this information is either being provided by going there and talking to informants, which are people from the tribes who remember the old days, or the Turkmen people themselves are involved in doing their own research for the first time. And that means they care enough to start writing the correct words. They care enough to start sending out the information. I'm sorry, you people are wrong. This is the right word. This is the right phrase. And this is what's being done right now. We're on the brink of, I'd say within 10 years or 15 years, everything is going to be known about these Turkmen rugs, which is, in my opinion, without question, the most interesting thing I've ever seen in my life. Not only is the weaving pure magic, I mean, they did this in the desert. They grabbed wool off of one of the animals, and they made the wool into yarn, and they wove things for thousands of years through trial and error, and we are the custodians of the last of them. So there's a great deal of responsibility involved in this custodianship. And unfortunately, there's not that much of it going on right now, and it's ego-driven in the United States. It's sort of spinning right now. But I really feel like in the next several years, a lot of that's going to stop. The overlapping is going to stop, spinning is going to stop, and some direct, simple, useful, clear pictures will be developed. Honest, truthful, clear pictures about exactly what's going on here. And if they can produce stuff like this, sitting in a desert with no machines, no word, no written history, no rulers, no computers, no nothing, as far as I'm concerned, it bears looking at. It really does. I think there are answers in these rugs that can be very useful in this world today. And I'm hoping to help that happen a little bit. And that's one of the reasons these rugs are here. Any more questions?
Did you say anything about, somebody asked about the dyes too? No good or red?
Matter. Matter. Yeah. Matter is a dye that's, well, actually Ann could probably tell you more than I could. But matter is, yeah.
Root of the wild matter, M-A-D-D-E-R.
Yeah. It's a root, and it's been there in the Middle East for God only knows how long. And it was used by everyone from the Romans to the Turks to the Turkmen, and it produces the red. The other dye is indigo, which is blue. Both of them are the only two colors in the Oriental rug world that don't run. And the interesting thing to me is there's a little cliche about the American flag. The American flag is the colors that don't run, which refers to the courage and bravery of American soldiers. But in fact, it really is the colors that don't run. It's white, which is absence of color, matter, which doesn't run, and blue, indigo, which doesn't run. So they knew that. Betsy Ross or whoever, they knew that a long time ago. We seem to forget things like that in the United States now, and I would like to see a little going back to that. It's pretty amazing. There are other dyes in there. Some of them there's bits and pieces of chemical reproduction dyes Russian traders brought in the 1890s, but not that much. Generally speaking, you're looking at pretty clearly vegetable dyes. And one thing, if you read my glossary, is it's extremely important that they're vegetable dyes, because there's no longer any, what I call magic. There's no magic in chemical dyes, but there's an amazing amount of magic in vegetable dyes. But you have to read the glossary to really understand that. Did you have questions?
I did. How old are some of the pieces here?
These pieces are all second half 19th century. A couple of them, like that one, is 1930. This one on the right represents the last of the good weaving from the alcohol oasis near Ashgabat. It ended by about 1930. That's it. It's finished forever. So what you see here is a spread from about 1860 to the very end. And you can just feel them and tell what's happened just by feeling them.
Well,
Pardon?
Susan said Charlotte would smack. So, but I will remind you this time that we do on the glossary to read a lot of these things. Are there other things?
Are there enough rugs extent to be able to identify these particular artisans who made the rugs? I mean, are there rugs or
Now, there are a lot of people right now trying to do statistical interpolation studies of the distribution of designs to try to link that to the tribes. Yes.
I'm thinking about the technique, the style.
I think that eventually what's going to happen is there's going to be a huge database. And that huge database is going to start weeding out the overlappings and weeding out the inconsistencies. Until then, it's anyone's guess. It's
My other question is very mundane. Why are some of them, do they have a sort of asymmetrical, why the borders on one side?
You mean, why is it misshaped?
Well, not misshaped, but I mean, this is much wide border has the bottom.
Oh, well, this is, again, this is the tribal unit, and they're placed in the desert. And so if you take this and shift it this way, this will be the foreground to the camp. This would be the camp. Yeah, it's a dioramic representation. It's hard to figure out, but you just got to see it that way. Once you see it that way, it's easy. Yeah, the main difference between Turkmen weaving, or Turkic or Turkish weaving, and Turkmen weaving. By the way, Turkmen, the word Turk is Turk, and men means I. So Turkmen means I, Turk, or I am a Turk. So Turkmen weaving, they use flat ground looms. Persian weavings are stand-up looms. That is a huge difference. So, for instance, there's almost no trees. So wood is very scarce. And this particular piece of 48-foot long Golam tent band strip was woven on a little loom 8 inches off the ground, 2 long pieces of wood, a couple of crossbars of wood, and they just wove it on the ground, kneeling next to it. And also, a lot of the pieces were the width of the woman's arm. So that's a natural biometric function that drives the size of the piece.